Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Russell Group pre-event webinar. We'll be chatting with 7 of the 24 Russell Group universities. Today's session, we're going to be focusing on the next steps now that you've submitted your UCAS application. This is going to include receiving offers from universities that you've applied for, choosing your firm and insurance choices, and what to do if you've changed your mind. We'll also be looking at about how universities have reacted to the cancellation of exams and the steps universities are taking to support students who've experienced disruption as a result of the pandemic. I'm Martin, I'll be your host of today, and as we discuss some of the options, and we'll be talking to each of our 7 panelists today in turn. Each panelist will talk you through a big question and provide advice. And we will be taking questions from the audience to answer in a live session at the end too. So please do submit your questions into the Q&A. Today we'll be talking to the University of Birmingham, Cardiff University, University of Edinburgh, University of Exeter, University of Liverpool, University of Oxford, and the University College London. I hope that lots of you are already registered to come along to our Meet the Russell Group event, which is next week, which all 24 of the Russell Group universities will be attending. It's a fantastic opportunity to explore all of them in one place, to learn more about each university and to talk directly to their staff and student ambassadors to ask your questions you have. I'll be giving you a bit more information about the event itself later, and we'll be put a link into the chat for you to sign up to as well. So we'll get started with the session today and dive into the first question. The first question is going to Mary Elliston of the University of Birmingham. So Mary, can you talk through the process briefly? What is a firm and insurance choice, and is there any sort of deadline involved?
Of course, thank you, Martin, and thank you all for joining the session. So hopefully you should have met that 29th of January deadline for applying to your university choices, and now is the time you should start hearing back from your universities and getting some offers in. So these offers will have individual conditions on, so academic requirements. If you're an international student, there may be some English language requirements. So from the offers that you receive back from universities, you will then have to narrow your choices down to 2 options, your firm and your insurance choice. So your firm is your first choice, where you would really like to go if you meet the conditions of your offer. You'll be confirmed a place at that university. And then your insurance choice is basically your backup. So it's typically lower entry requirements. And if you don't get into your firm, you then have your insurance choice as a backup option for you. So you should start receiving some offers back, and you'll hear back if you met the January deadline by the 20th of May, and then you have till the 10th of June to then reply back. Other key dates to be aware of is the UCAS Extra, which opens on the 25th of February. You can use this to apply to other courses at other universities if you aren't holding any offers or waiting on any further decisions. So that's something to be aware of there. So that's a brief overview of the process and what a firm and insurance choice means when you are deciding which university you want to go to.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, we're going to pop over now to Charlotte Paley from Cardiff University. Charlotte, what do I do if my top choices have given me the same offer, or if I've not heard anything yet?
Hi everyone, just to quickly introduce myself. So I'm Charlotte and I work for the student recruitment team here at Cardiff University. And I'm going to start by answering the second half of the question first, which is what if I haven't heard anything back yet? So first of all, don't panic. No news isn't necessarily bad news. Each university will make their decision at different times, meaning you may hear back before your friends or the other way around. So as mentioned, the UCAS deadline was extended this year to the 29th of January to allow students more time to apply. So this will have a knock-on effect with universities, and this year we do have up until May to make a decision on your application. You do need to bear in mind that universities will get thousands of applications, and we need to very carefully read through each and every one. So if your application hasn't been reviewed yet, you are in no way disadvantaged. Each and every university will have different processing times, and they'll work differently in terms of when they make you offers and how they make you offers. So sit tight and wait patiently until you hear back. And in terms of what happens if your two top choices have given you the same offer, it's quite an interesting situation. Normally when you are choosing your firm and your insurance choice, we would recommend that your insurance choice has a slightly lower entry requirement than your firm choice. So if you don't meet the requirements of your firm, you still have the insurance choice to fall back on. So in respect of that, even if they are both of your two top universities, it wouldn't necessarily be a good idea to list them both as your firm and your insurance. So you do need to kind of decide on one. So make sure you're reading carefully through the conditions of both offers so that you know exactly what the universities require from you. And unfortunately, the time you spend researching doesn't end when you have submitted your application. If you are undecided between the two universities, you do need to be doing more in-depth research into the course, the facilities, accommodation, the support teams, and the city itself to determine what is the right university for you. So take advantage of things like UniBuddy, which is on most university websites. This obviously allows you to talk with current students in real time. And there's also lots of different offer holder events going on at the moment, so try your best to attend one of those if you have been invited to one. But yeah, like just to go back to my original point, you really do need to think about what course and what university is right for you and which you can see yourself being most happy and most comfortable at.
Fantastic, thanks Charlotte. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Keir at the University of Edinburgh. Keir, I've changed my mind about my choices. What are my options?
Hi there, yes, my name is Keir. I'm from the University of Edinburgh. I'm the recruitment manager here, and I've been working in universities for nearly, in fact, just over 10 years now. And this is a question that does come up every single year. So the first thing, like Charlotte said, is not to panic. These things do happen. A lot of you will have applied for 5 different universities, which is absolutely great. It gives yourself a lot of options that are wide and open. If you decide that you don't want to go to any of the 5 choices of universities, that's okay. There are other opportunities to apply to university like UCAS Extra and like UCAS Clearing, which you've already heard about from other contributors today. So there are other opportunities to apply. Now, the equal consideration deadline has just passed on the 29th of January. So not all courses and not all universities will be open for things like UCAS Extra and UCAS Clearing, but there are a significant amount of students that do come through these channels every single year. So you will definitely not be alone. If you make your first and your second choice, your firm and insurance choice, and you want to change your options at that point, it gets a little bit more complicated, but there are still options for you. You can still contact UCAS, you can still contact the universities. And my final point on this is really just kind of get the advice that you need to get. So your school have been doing UCAS applications for many, many years. They know the ins and outs of how to apply to university. Us as professionals, we have been at universities for a long, long time, and we can give you advice and guidance, and we're here to help you. So dropping an email to the university's admissions is absolutely fine. And if there's telephone numbers on websites, picking up the phone and speaking to people like us, and we can advise on what you can do and how you can do that. And I think the last point that Charlotte made is a really important point. So I'm just going to kind of reiterate that. It is really about your research. So before you make your first your firm and insurance choices, please do make sure you're making these choices as informed as possible. And I know it's a very difficult time this year not being able to get on campus. So putting that extra mile in, looking at websites, speaking to students is really, really important this year, more than any other year. And as I said before, for us to come and give you advice and guidance, please use us as a resource as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Keir. I'm going to be passing over now to Vicky Glaze at the University of Exeter. The question, Vicky, I've been invited to an interview. How important is this and what will it be like?
Thank you. So firstly, if you've been invited to an interview, then well done, congratulations. It's a great start. Currently, most interviews, face-to-face interviews have been cancelled, and a lot of them have been moved online for obvious reasons due to COVID. And at Exeter, we actually only interview for medicine, nursing, medical imaging and applied psychology. So universities really do vary on this. So I would firstly recommend double checking with the institutions that you've applied to whether they are going ahead with online interviews. It is important to attend the interview if you have been invited. So most of the time you'll be invited by the admissions department of the university, and they'll email you and contact you with all of the relevant information. It is important to attend these if you are invited and if you can, because some of your offers will be subject to you completing this interview. So do make sure that you look out for that. There are different types of interviews depending on the university you apply to and also which course you're applying for. So typically there's the conventional kind of discussion-based panel interview, which will normally include a discussion between you and, say, the course tutor or the admissions tutor for that course, where they may ask you questions like why you want to study the course, or they could even set you a task. There's also the MMI style interview, which stands for mini multiple interviews. And this style of interview is often used for medicine or similar programs, often medical type programs. And these consist of a series of short structured interviews. And it's normally, when it happens physically, little interview stations that you would go between, and you'd have maybe 3 minutes at each station. This style of interview is used to assess your suitability for the programme. So it focuses on your communication, your empathy skills, your strengths and weaknesses. And this style of interview has been moved online, especially at Exeter. It's been moved online and it's happening on Zoom. And rather than going to each physical station, you'll go into different breakout rooms. So universities have had to get quite clever with how they can still undertake these style of interviews. So I would definitely say that if you are required to have an interview, you'll be contacted by the university. Do undertake the interview if you are asked, and do have a look and see how they are going to be set up and how the format's going to look. Each university really does vary, and each course varies as well. Hope that answered your question.
Many thanks, Vicky. I'm going to pass now over to Louise Carr from the University of Liverpool. Louise, can you explain what will happen now exams have been cancelled? How will universities use centre assessed grades?
Right, okay. So the first part there, what's happening with exams being cancelled? So what's already been going on behind the scenes is that there's been a consultation up at government level. They've been taking lots of people's opinions about how things should work. So it's not going to be until the end of this month that we hear the results of this consultation. So hopefully at the end of this month, ourselves and universities and your teachers will have a bit more information about how these centre assessed grades are actually going to come about and when you're going to hear them as well. So a bit of a hold on for now. Hopefully we'll hear more information later on. Now, as for the question of how will universities use these new centre assessed grades? Well, we had a trial run of that last year, didn't we? Because do you remember last year's students didn't have exams either. So in universities, we'll just simply accept your formal grade that you're awarded and use that in our assessment of your application for the academic side of things. Because do remember that quite often it's not just your grades that we're looking for. We'll also look at things like your performance at interview, auditions, portfolios, perhaps an additional test for something like medical related. So we'll try and look at your whole application. Now we do understand there's been a lot of disruption, etc. going on, but I won't talk any more on that because I know that Richard's going to be exploring that a little bit more straight after me.
Thanks, Louise. And yeah, that's a fantastic segue now to pass over to Richard Petty at the University of Oxford. Richard, will universities be more lenient on grades this year, given the disruption? What happens if my awarded grades don't meet my offer?
Hi, good afternoon. Richard Petty, University of Oxford. I work for Trinity College, one of the colleges at Oxford, and work particularly in the North East region. Great question. Will there be more leniency this year in the light of disruption as we've experienced over the last 10 to 12 months? I think it's fair to say that universities have been keeping abreast with the developments as have been issued by the government over the last 10 to 12 months. And in essence, we do recognise that your educational experiences, because of the pandemic, have, of course, been changed. So in terms of the general question of lenience, yes, there is a great degree of lenience being built in. Different institutions and different courses will have different capacities to offer lenience. Now, lenience is being built into the system in terms of the overview of the calculated grades that Louise has just explained. But essentially the degree to which each university within the Russell Group and indeed beyond it can be lenient, and if you want to measure leniency in terms of how far they can bend, for instance, to give a place to somebody who perhaps hasn't achieved their predicted grades, it really depends on the institution. But I would really want to preface it really by saying, yes, we're very aware across the university sector as a whole of the interruptions to educational experiences, and there is leniency built into the whole of this year's 2021 entry. Thank you.
Many thanks, Richard. We're going to pass now over to Raoul Morley from University College London. Raoul, I'm worried about how I get on at university. I've not been in school/sixth form for so long. What are universities doing to help?
Okay, so I think that everyone is aware that that's happened, that we're all in that situation. All students are effectively in exactly the same position. So you will find typically increased level of resource for students. So things that we're offering at UCL are introductory sessions so that you can get used to academic writing. And we'll be sending those round to teachers in the next few weeks. So you should be able to engage with those, and they'll also be on the UCL website. We also run all of the same level of student support that we always have done, and other institutions will do the same thing. Typically, you're going to find that academic members of staff are going to be there and available to assist you in the same way that they always have, but remotely. I think it's really important to remember that everyone is in exactly the same position as you, and that your experience, although unique to you, is very much a group experience of a cohort. So there is more online assistance available for us, and certainly all of our facilities, all of our student support facilities, or all of our universities will have gone virtual to assist you making that transition from sixth form or an FE college to attending higher education. So I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Raoul. And thanks guys for answering all those questions. We wanted to use the webinar today to obviously answer some of your questions, but also talk to you about the Russell Group virtual event that we've got taking place next week on Wednesday, 10th of February, which is between 10 and 7 p.m. I hope these presentations obviously giving you a little bit more information about what's going on, but today obviously we are talking with 7 of the 24 universities in the Russell Group, and all 24 will be involved in the university fair next week. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Russell Group, we'd really recommend coming along next Wednesday. You'll be able to explore booths with information on each, take part in a number of webinars, and you'll probably see some of the faces that you've seen today involved in some of those. And we're going to be covering a range of different topics about kind of student life, how you can access bursaries, scholarships, etc. You'll also be able to chat live to a range of different universities and representatives who can advise you about accommodation, courses, open days, and a multitude of different questions that will be relevant if you're going to be going to university next year. So please do join us next week. I've put a link across to you now in the chat, so you'll be able to find the ability to go onto there and register completely free of charge. And also, if you're viewing this after this session has gone on, it will be in the YouTube description as well. Fantastic. Well, like I say, thank you very much for all those people who've popped questions across in the Q&A so far. We're going to go through some of those now. I do apologise if we don't make it along to all of them, but hopefully the guys here will be responding in the chat as well and can help out. So we'll move over to the first question, and I'm going to pass it back on to Mary from the University of Birmingham. Mary, do you anticipate as many or more opportunities in clearing this year, and what will that will that process still work in the same way as previous years?
Really good question. So currently, the process will work exactly the same as it does in previous years. You can contact the university when that clearing opens on the 24th of August, and you can apply if you have maybe got higher entry requirements that you respect. You might want to be interested in a university with slightly higher entry requirements, or if you have slightly lower ones, you can also go through clearing and see what options are available for you. In terms of the first half of the question, so are we expecting to have more places in clearing than usual? From Birmingham's perspective, we're not anticipating to be expecting more students to come through clearing this year, even though there has been a change in the way that students have been assessed. We're expecting similar numbers, and I think the way in which that students will get their grades won't affect an increase in the amount of students coming to Birmingham through clearing. So from our institution's perspective, we're not expecting more places and more students to come through that avenue to apply and to come to Birmingham. I hope that answers the question.
Many thanks, Charlotte. I'm going to pass back, sorry, Mary. I'm going to pass through to Charlotte now from Cardiff University. And the question, Charlotte, is, will there be any additional financial support for students given the effect of the pandemic?
Yeah, so with this one, this will differ from different university to university. What I would recommend is all the different types of funding options that are available to you. Normally, you'll be able to find them on individual university websites. It is a difficult situation. Obviously, we are aware of the difficulties that students will have faced this year, over the past year, and also over the upcoming months as well. If there are any circumstances, I'd recommend getting in touch with the universities beforehand to discuss them with them. Normally, the support team, so we hire Advice and Money team here at Cardiff, and they are available for students to have a chat with and discuss options even before you come to the university. So like I said, it will differ from university to university, but if you are concerned about anything like that, I'd recommend getting in touch with the universities themselves to discuss it.
Many thanks, Charlotte. Next question is for Keir at the University of Edinburgh. Will studying at a Russell Group University impact my opportunities post-university?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, it depends on how well you do at that Russell Group University. Obviously, we have got excellent reputations as a group of universities, but there are lots of universities out there with excellent reputations in their particular field of excellence. So it really depends on how well you do at university. Just by the virtue of coming to a Russell Group University does not guarantee you excellent chances after graduation. You really do have to work hard when you get here. And if you did go to a non-Russell Group University and did really well and got a great degree and made all the connections and networks that you can do at university, you've still got excellent opportunities after university. So actually, where you go isn't necessarily a kind of predetermined factor of how you're going to get on after university. It really just depends on how well you do when you're there and how many opportunities you take up when you're at university.
Thanks, Keir. Next question is for Vicky at University of Exeter. The question, how are classes currently being delivered, and is it anticipated that it will be in the same fashion in September?
Thank you. Good question. And at the moment, obviously, we're all living under lockdown restrictions. So a lot of lectures and seminars have moved online. So a lot of them are being delivered online, and universities also have fantastic like online learning portals and platforms so that work can be submitted through there and disseminated through there. Lots of pre-recorded content that students can watch. But a lot of lectures and seminars are happening online because they have to at the moment. There are some subjects that it's essential for them to come and have very small in-person contact. But at the moment, as you would expect, most universities have moved online. In terms of how we think that's going to happen for kind of your guys' year of entry, absolutely, we would love to be able to move towards face-to-face teaching. It is too soon now, unfortunately, to be able to say for certain whether that's going to be able to happen. It will be dependent on a lot of things that are completely out of our control at the moment. There are some really fantastic benefits to online learning. It allows students to learn flexibly around when works for them. And it also means that you can kind of pause, stop, rewind, and lots of things as well. So there are some really fantastic benefits. We hope we can move to some online, some face-to-face interaction, but unfortunately at the moment it is a little bit too early to tell, but we're hopeful.
Thanks a lot, Vicky. I'm going to pass over to Louise now at the University of Liverpool. Louise, the question, should I be concerned that I haven't had the opportunity to visit universities that I've applied for?
What you can do, of course, there's lots of virtual events that you can attend, so make the most of any of those sorts of opportunities as they're offered to you. Now, each university, I'm sure, will do something similar to what we do at the University of Liverpool. So if we, for example, give you an offer for a place, we send you an invitation to a sort of special event where it's only other offer holders attending. So again, it's another opportunity for you to speak to staff, but also speaking to students, because they can give you that perspective of what teaching and learning has been like in the current circumstances as well. But make the most of all of those sorts of opportunities. We, of course, don't know when it's going to be possible for people to travel and visit campuses again. So there may be the opportunity in sort of late summer, perhaps. So do keep your eye open about what opportunities do arise. Look at university websites to see if you can sign up to receive their updates as well, because then you'll find out when and if any sort of physical events are happening too. So I know it can be concerning, but we'll all just have to live a little bit virtually at the moment, but do make the most of asking questions of people.
Thanks, Louise. Over to Richard at University of Oxford now. Richard, the question, how are universities supporting students with mental health concerns during their studies?
To a great extent is the straightforward answer to that. It's a great question. Universities have really evolved in the last couple of decades in terms of pastoral support for their students. It's a big issue in any time, and universities have a responsibility to look after our students. And of course, this certainly applies to mental health considerations. I think it's worthwhile also saying that in the current climate, of course, as you see across society generally, and not just in education and not just in the UK, there are increasing concerns, of course, about mental health and well-being as we've entered the pandemic. And I think universities have never been more aware of the need to look after their students in this respect, particularly since the start of the pandemic. So traditionally and across the Russell Group, universities will have different structures for looking after their students pastorally. Briefly, to speak of Oxford's system, essentially was separated into colleges that might be similar to halls of residences in other universities. And within those smaller units, so say you join a university that's got 25,000 students in it, don't see yourselves as being part of that 25,000 student body and nobody's going to be able to see you and pick up on you as an individual. You are, of course, broken down into smaller units. You will have a tutor that is responsible for looking after your welfare and the welfare of other students alongside you. And it's something we are very aware of and doing more to combat more than ever, I would say. So yeah, really important for us. And I hope that really shows you without being too specific in the answer, because it really depends on individual institutions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Richard. I'm going to pass over to Raoul at UCL now. Raoul, if I've applied and been accepted for a place at university, what are my options if I want to defer? And will my place be secure the following year?
So this is very much a case, going to be a case-by-case basis at different universities, and whether you can have the room to defer or not. So at UCL, despite the pandemic and an increase in applications across the board, we actually have had not much in the way of deferral. Typically, we're completely comfortable with students deferring at UCL, but again, this is something you'll need to check with the institution that you're applying to, and often the course you're applying to. So quantitative courses can be a little more demanding perhaps than sort of less quantitative degrees, about whether students are able to defer or even can defer at all, and how they would go about that. But typically at UCL, if you'd like to defer, that's absolutely fine. We're great with that. Just check with the institution that you're applying to, and we haven't seen a rise in the number of deferrals at all at UCL. So I'll leave that there.
Thanks, Raoul. Okay, we're going to go around to the beginning again. We're going to be going back to Mary at the University of Birmingham. Mary, what is the difference between a conditional offer and an unconditional offer?
Okay, so the basic difference between the two types of offer is that a conditional offer has some further entry requirements on it, so some further academic entry requirements, some grades that you'll have to get, an AAB offer, for example, an English language requirement could be part of your conditional offer, whereas an unconditional offer means that you won't have to actually get those grades in order to come to the university. The university has taken that step to think that they're going to put their faith in you as a student. They want you to come to that institution, and they'll give you that offer not dependent on any academic achievements. There may be some caveats, so that you might only be able to get an unconditional offer if you then put that university as your firm choice. So that's something to be aware of. I know at Birmingham, we actually don't offer unconditional offers anymore. We have other sort of flexible offer schemes, but we don't offer unconditional offers. But I know that is something to be aware of from other universities. So yeah, simple difference. Conditional will have some conditions on it. Unconditional won't have any academic conditions on it.
Thanks, Mary. Going back over to Charlotte at Cardiff University. If entry requirements are AAA and your predicted grades are A star AB, will the university still consider your application?
I think, like most people are saying today, again, it is normally a case-by-case basis that will change depending on the institute that you've applied to. At Cardiff, we do tend to take the view that those grades do tend to equal out. So we would normally say that that would still be considered, but like I said, it's worth double checking with each institute. Obviously, it does depend depend as well on things like very popular courses. Normally things like medicine, dentistry are stricter with grade requirements than other courses. So yeah, it really can depend on the university that you've applied to and the type of course that you've applied to as well. But yeah, just to reiterate, here at Cardiff, for example, on the majority of our courses, that would still be considered.
Thanks, Charlotte. Now back over to Keir at University of Edinburgh. And actually, this question possibly would have been better posted in the other Zoom session that's going on at the moment, which is for Year 12s. But I think it's a good question, just in case we have got any other Year 12s in attendance for the webinar today. But Keir, the question is, I'm applying to uni for 2022. If A-levels happen in 2022, how will grades this year be compared to those? And I guess what the question is trying to get at is, will the entry requirements for 2022 potentially be shaped by predicted grades, potentially having an effect on averages for 2021?
Yeah, it's a good question. Unfortunately, it's one of those crystal ball questions. We don't really know what's going to happen to entry requirements next year. We don't know if exams will be sat next year. Of course, we all hope that they will. What I can kind of say is you wouldn't necessarily be in competition of people who are getting centre assessed grades this year, because people that are getting centre assessed grades this year, the vast majority of them will be going to university this year. So in essence, you would be in a competitive pool with other students who are doing exams in 2022. I think it's worthwhile just keeping an eye on universities and what their entry requirements are looking like. I would be very surprised if there's massive changes, because you are competing against people who are in the same boat as you, rather than competing with people who have only got centre assessed grades. And we know that it's a real concern, and people will be rightfully kind of worried about what's going to happen in the future. But kind of looking forward and kind of taking a more positive outlook on things, we will get back to normal. We will get back to sitting exams just like we have done for many years. And the universities are always here to kind of make sure it's fair for you. We're not wanting to make it unfair for any students. Thank you.
Thanks, Keir. Now pop over to Vicky again from the University of Exeter. Vicky, the question is, can you book accommodation for both your insurance and firm choices?
Okay, so I'm going to speak from University of Exeter's point of view on this. You would only be invited to book accommodation if you have Exeter as your firm choice. So that is going to be quite typical with most universities. If you have made university your firm choice, then it's likely you'll be invited to at some point, maybe not right now. Some do now, but some do wait a little bit longer. We don't actually open our applications for accommodation until April. So it's unlikely that if you put a university as your insurance choice, that you would be able to book or apply for any accommodation, any university managed accommodation with that university. But what I would say is, yes, certainly be led by the university. So they will normally contact you with any kind of information if you are or are not eligible. They'll contact you with kind of how to apply for that and when. So definitely keep an eye on your inbox and be led by those universities. But I would say it's unlikely you'd be able to book and apply for accommodation at an insurance choice, but you will be from a firm choice.
Thanks, Vicky. Question now for Louise at the University of Liverpool. Is there any disadvantage for doing a Btec when applying for Russell Group universities?
Okay, that will vary a little bit, because even though we're all part of the Russell Group, we are still independent universities. So we all set our own admissions requirements. So from a Liverpool perspective, we will accept Btecs for quite a lot of our courses, the vast majority of our courses. So it's worthwhile to double check university websites to find out what exactly they're asking for. So please look for the qualification, whether it's a Btec or an access course or an IB, and to find in that table or however it's presented on the website, to find your particular qualification, to double check what that university says and exactly what they're asking for. So it could be that, yes, you do accept a Btec, but they might ask for particular GCSE grades as well. So again, it will vary a bit depending which university you ask and also which course you're applying to. So again, at Liverpool, we do accept them for some, we don't for others. So for something like medicine, for example, we would not accept a Btec. However, we do have something called a foundation programme. So it's always worthwhile getting in contact with universities, being very clear about what qualification you actually have, not what you think the equivalent is, and then asking for their advice. So that's my advice to you.
Thanks a lot, Louise. Question now to Richard. I'm going to slightly paraphrase, I think, this question that's come through. International exam boards have said that exams will still occur in some countries. Will grades required for international students be slightly reviewed, given that students have actually still had to sit the exam at all?
That's a great question. Some fantastic questions coming through on the Q&A. Essentially, the question, the answer to the question depends on which country, which examination system, but I think it's very easy to say that all of the universities in the Russell Group, and I know I can obviously speak for the University of Oxford, seeing the process it goes through every year, it pours through the local examination scenario for every single country from whom it's had applicants. And it is aware that different conditions prevail in any year, but of course, particularly in 2020 and 2021, with regards to what's happened to exams in that particular country. So it really depends on the country, but I know from some of the work that was done after exam results were announced last year in August, and calculated grades, there was a huge amount of information gathering with regards to what was happening in every single country from which applicants hailed. So I hope that answers that question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Richard. Question now for Raoul. I think it's been slightly covered before, but I think that this kind of adds a real sense of struggles that students have been having. And if you have been struggling, of course, the important thing is to know that you're not the only one. Other people are really, really struggling as well. So don't feel like you're slightly alienated or worried because you're struggling because others are. So Raoul, what happens if you do not attain the grades needed for the course, even though you've had a firm offer from the university? I'm predicted AAB, but circumstances at home have made it difficult to study, alongside the unconventional concept of online learning. Very unnerved and worried that the university will reject me if I do not meet those grades. What would be your advice?
Okay, so I could genuinely only speak for UCL in this context. So any adjustment that needs to be done about your grades or your entry requirements or your circumstances needs to be discussed with your school first and foremost, and then covered with an examination board that covers your exams. So UCL as an institution will only look at the entry requirements that we see in front of us and the outcomes that we have. So you need to have that decision made at school and exam board level. So very simply for UCL, and typically if you don't meet the entry requirements, then we won't be in a position to honour the grades. So the offer is a legally binding document between the institution that you apply for and yourself and your academic outcomes. So last year, when there was the government U-turn, although we had admitted as many students as we needed at UCL, we were then duty bound because of the legally binding nature of a document to take all the students who were reassessed. If for any reason you have underachieved and you can't get the leeway required in your exam board assessment, then you are more than welcome to sit the examination when it occurs, and that will be regarded as your first attempt. So if you achieve the grades at the exam at that point, then we will still absolutely honour your offer and you would be able to join us the following year at UCL. Okay, I'll leave that there.
Thanks, Raoul. I think we'll go through one more round of questions. So I'm going to pass this question through to Mary at the University of Birmingham. The question is, and I think this is a very, very good one actually. If a student is homeschooled normally, not just through the process at the moment, and they're not able to get centre assessed grades, is there a way that they can do a separate exam, or how can they really demonstrate to the university their ability to study there?
You know what, Martin, that is a really good question, and I'm not exactly sure of the answer to that one from Birmingham's perspective and from a broader perspective. So I think that we'll need some form of assessed grade that from that student in order to get to university. But as far as homeschooling goes, I don't know how you would get a centre assessed grade, because obviously there isn't a centre there to assess that student. So I would advise checking with each institution that you're interested in and that you've received maybe offers from, and how their different approaches there, the individual admissions teams, and also just more broadly if there's any government advice, because I'm not exactly sure of the answer to that one, unfortunately, there. But yeah, there'll be some information online that you can have a look at there and get some advice on to how to get the centre assessed grade for you there.
Thanks a lot, Mary. I'll pass now through to Charlotte at Cardiff University. A little bit more of a generic question. How and when do you apply for a student loan?
Yeah, so this will kind of differ. Normally you'll get a notification and you'll get the notification via email when it's ready for you to apply. So I know I personally, people kind of had it at different times. So do just keep an eye out for that. It will be now around the same time that you are accepting your offers and you're making your firm and your insurance choices. So that will be coming up a little bit later this year in around May time.
That's great. Thanks, Charlotte. Now back over to Keir. Is there any advantages at all to accepting my firm and insurance offers early? For example, anything to do with allocation of accommodation in halls?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess if you absolutely 100% know what your first choice is and what your insurance choice is likely to be, you can make that choice. But like I said in one of my other contributions earlier, it's really important to make sure that you're doing as much research as you possibly can, so you don't fall into the situation of making your choices and then a little bit later finding out more information and wanting to change your options, because that's when it gets a little bit more complicated. If you want things kind of done and dusted, you can obviously pick your first insurance choice whenever you like, and that's obviously going to be beneficial for when accommodation opens, etc. What a lot of universities will do though, and it's something we do at the University of Edinburgh, is we hold back a proportion of each type of accommodation for all students. So whether you make your decision in March or whether you make your decision at clearing time in August, you've still got a really good chance of getting your kind of priority, first choice of accommodation here at the university. And I know some of the other universities on the call and some of the other universities that aren't here today will be in a similar position as that. So just to kind of summarize what you were saying there, yes, there is an advantage of picking your first insurance choice if you are 100% sure that that's where you want to go. If you're not 100% sure, I would hold off, do your research and make sure you're making the right decision, because you do have time and the universities are here to help you along the way in that decision. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Keir. Question now to Vicky at the University of Exeter. Are there any allowances for students whose school have perhaps suffered more in the ability to deliver home learning?
So As we know, every kind of student's learning experience has been hugely disrupted due to COVID. And unfortunately, there are some schools, some year groups that have been particularly impacted by that. In terms of how this might affect your university application, in the first instance, we would expect the school to flag that with the exam board or whoever's going to be moderating those results, so that they can flag that and take that into consideration at that stage. So we would expect for the results that we received to already have had that kind of that flagged. We would also say that if there are significant disruptions to particular students, for your teacher or tutor, whoever's going to be writing your UCAS reference as part of your UCAS application, to write that within the reference, so you can include any extenuating circumstances within the UCAS reference for your tutor or teacher to include. So if you do feel particularly concerned about that, maybe do have a chat, identify within your school or college who's going to be writing that reference for you so that they can include some information in there. But yeah, hopefully that gives an answer. We would expect for the disruption to be flagged with the exam board in the first instance, so that those grades have already been taken into consideration before we receive them.
Thanks a lot, Vicky. Question for Louise. I'm going to have to ask her slightly to get out her crystal ball for this question. Will we know about how the courses will be delivered, i.e. between face-to-face and online split, before we make our final decisions?
Probably not, because no one really knows what's going to happen. As we've seen with how restaurants are opening and then closing again week on week. So what's going to happen by the time we get to September? We don't really know. As someone mentioned earlier, we'll be hopeful because hopefully by that time there'll be a lot more sort of vaccinations going on, etc. So hopefully it is a little bit more stable. But at the moment, so each university will be a little bit different. At Liverpool, we have very much been doing a bit of a mixture of mostly virtual learning, but then we teach quite a few things like medicine, dentistry, veterinary, where there has been some in-person teaching, but of course we're in much more severe lockdown at the moment. So we're going to have to follow government guidelines as everyone does in other types of business and education there. So unfortunately, I can't give you a firm, solid answer, but do please keep those channels of communication open with universities. Talk to them as much as you can. Take advantage of any opportunity to visit them virtually, to engage in sessions like this as well, just to try and get a bit more information. But unfortunately, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer before we can confirm what's going to happen regarding teaching at universities later. Okay.
Thanks, Louise. We're into our final two questions now. I'm going to pass this one over to Richard at the University of Oxford. Would sitting a mock exam at the exam centre help me with my application?
Really interesting question. Sitting a mock exam would arguably help you in all aspects of your education in that particular subject over your A-level or equivalent journey. In most cases, schools having to think about calculated grades last year in 2020 and also in this year in 2021 are going to want to substantiate, give evidence for their calculated grades as best as possible. And most schools will probably take the view that having a fairly rigorous exam is, in some cases, perhaps the fairest, but in other cases, perhaps the most informative way of finding out how you're doing academically in that particular subject. So it's arguably always useful to do a mock exam. And indeed, that advice would also depend on subject, because some subjects, by the way they're taught and the way they're learned, for example, a more repetitive way of feeding in knowledge and also testing it, would see it as being particularly useful. So really, yes, it would always be useful, particularly for calculated grades, yes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Richard. And over to our final question of the session, which is going to go to Raoul at UCL. At what point might you apply for a scholarship or be offered one?
So typically at UCL, I can't speak for other institutions, you will be made an offer, and at the point that you've made an offer, you will be encouraged to or to apply for scholarships at UCL. I think that's it.
Thanks, Raoul. Perfectly. Okay, well, that's going to be our last question of the day. As we mentioned before, there is a Meet the Russell Group event, which is happening next Wednesday between 12 p.m. and 7 p.m. I put the note of the website for that a little bit earlier, but just to confirm, it is www.russellgroup.vfairs.com. I'd like to say a big thank you to the guys that are helping us today from the University of Birmingham, Cardiff University, University of Edinburgh, University of Exeter, University of Liverpool, University of Oxford and UCL. Of course, you can see them as well as the 17 other institutions at the event next week. Again, thank you very much to all the presenters. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at the event next week.